to the Town of Redington Shores Planning and Zoning Board, and Local Planning Agency meeting. Today is Thursday, March 18th, 2021. It is 6:30 p.m. This is a hybrid meeting, in person and on Zoom. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Sherry, please call roll.
Member Bourgeois,
Present.
Member Kaby,
Here.
Member Hoyt,
Present.
Member Laird,
Here.
Chair Foster,
Here.
and Attorney Denhart.
Here.
And if we could have the folks that are present in person state their names and who they are representing. We're supposed to have only the contiguous properties in-house and then everybody else on Zoom, so we'll start from the back.
Hi, I'm Mary Frances Grinnell, and I'm the president of the board of directors of Statutes Condominiums, and this is Lynette Garcia, also a member of the board of directors.
Thank you.
Robert Pergolizzi, 17450 Gulf Boulevard, Anglers Cove. I'm the vice president of the board of directors of Anglers Cove.
Thank you.
Court orders exempt.
Sean Hatfield, 17495 Gulf Boulevard, San Vista Hotel.
Thank you. And,
Todd Preston with the applicant. Joe Lackey with the applicant.
thank you.
Dave Healy, town's planning consultant.
Thank you very much. Okay. This is a quasi-judicial hearing being conducted by Communications Media Technology, the applicant, town attorney, and staff quasi-judicial body, and representatives immediately adjacent to the applicant property are present in person for this hearing. The board will hear testimony from all in-person representatives and our Zoom attendees. Town staff will first provide comments, followed by the applicant. We will then take testimony from our in-person and Zoom attendees that plan to speak. Individuals who wish to provide testimony at this hearing will be sworn in. At this time, I ask that all in-person attendees and those individuals participating via Communications Media Technology to please stand and raise your right hand to be sworn in by the deputy clerk.
Once again, I'll ask, please, that all of our participants who also wish to provide testimony via Zoom or Communications Media Technology to please also stand and raise your hand to be sworn in. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Thank you. So this is a quasi-judicial public hearing for 17490 Gulf Boulevard, Redington Shores. There are applications for amendment to the town future land use map from rec open space to residential high, and the second item is an amendment of the town zoning map from outdoor rec open space to medium high density multi residential. And we're going to allow Mr. Pressman, who's speaking on behalf of the town. I'm sorry.
Mr. Healy.
Mr. Healy, on behalf of the town first, and then we'll go to Mr. President second.
And if we could, as each of you in the room, if you make any comments or presentation before your presentation, would you just state your name and address and indicate that you have been sworn. And the same for any attendees on Zoom. When we get to that point, if you wish to say anything, would you please preface your comments with stating your name and your address and letting the board know whether you have or have not taken the oath. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the board, my name is Dave Healy with Healy Consultant Services. I'm here tonight in my role as the town planning consultant, and would note, first of all, that at the initial public hearing back on February 11th, I did submit into the record. The board accepted my full report dated December 28th, and I would like to add to that the addendum that was submitted today with reference to the notation of the separate piece of parcel of land adjoining the Germack property between it and Sea Oats. So with your approval, I would enter that into the record as well, and I will refer to it. Let me start. I reviewed the video from the last meeting, and a couple of things occurred to me as I did. One is that,
Let me interrupt you. One thing that I did mean to say, I apologize for interrupting you, but as many of you know, this hearing was started several weeks back, and it became necessary that it be postponed. There are different board members here tonight. The code says that the board is 5 people, and including possibly 2 alternates, and there's a full board of 5 people here. But basically, we're starting fresh and anew tonight, so I would ask anybody that makes a presentation, if you take that into consideration and don't just assume that members on the board know what you may have said at the previous meeting, and the same to you on the board. If you have any questions, if you asked them last time, you'll need to ask them again this time, so that this hearing and this record is one complete hearing within itself. Apologize.
very good. Let me start by explaining my role. I think I may not have done that adequately last time. I've been engaged by the town to review the applications for land use plan amendment and zoning. That role is not to advocate either for or against the applicant, but to advocate in the interests of the town as a whole. And my purpose in being here is to try and identify those relevant considerations that I believe are relevant to take into account in your evaluation of both the plan map amendment and the zoning amendment. And I've tried to do that, and we'll be glad to elaborate on those as we go through this. May I ask first, is the board comfortable if I remove this mask?
Yes.
I'm finding it difficult to
It's hard to hear you.
communicate. Are you
Please-
sure while I'm up here? Thank you.
Please, thank you.
And I can breathe too. Thank you. The report, as was presented, includes some of the basics on the application itself, the type of request. The chairman has identified that. It's to amend the existing plan from recreation open space to high density residential, and the corresponding zoning from outdoor public open space to RM15 to correspond with the plan amendment. It identifies the property location and the applicant. I'm not going to insult you by reading all of the details. You've seen the report. I want to highlight it and work through it as rapidly as we can to give everybody else a chance to comment. The property is at 17490 Gulf Boulevard. It is owned by Germack Limited with Mr. Nashat Antonius, the partner, and his agent tonight is Mr. Todd Pressman. The size of the property is a little less than 3/4 of an acre, 0.7225 acres to be exact. It's about 100 feet in width and approximately 315 feet in average depth. I've described the future land use map on the west side of Gulf Boulevard as essentially being a contiguous area of high density residential and zoned RM15. The addendum that you have corrects that to the extent that it notes that the minor exception to this uniform high density residential pattern is a small strip of land lying between the subject property and the Sea Oats condominium property that is zoned outdoor recreation public open space. That is something I wasn't aware of at the beginning, and I think neither was the board until it was brought to our mutual attention. So the addendum largely addresses that same correction or qualification, if you will, throughout the report. And I'll refer to it if we need to, otherwise I won't repeat the same information. It describes then the applicant's proposed use, which is multifamily residential use, and that notes that it is a provision in the plan for multifamily residential use in the RM15. There is no site plan that accompanies the application. That was discussed at length with the applicant. They've chosen not to do that, and so it was not applicable, and there is no site plan that accompanies the request. We've identified an outline of the plan amendment process so that the board and the public can be aware of the chronology or the sequence of events that takes place or will need to take place as the application moves through the process. It began back in October and November in meetings with the applicant. My report was prepared subsequent to that in December. The Town Commission authorized the Planning and Zoning Board then to proceed to consider it in January. The proposed two ordinances were advertised properly in January. So this is the continuation, if you will, of that first public hearing by the Planning and Zoning Board. Obviously, having been continued, the rest of the dates in here will have to be adjusted accordingly. Very likely, the Town Commission hearing, the first hearing would be in April. The review by the outside agencies, the state and the county, in the May to June, July timeframe, and back here, if it proceeds through the full course of events, in August or September. And if there are questions about that or how the rest of that process works, why, please feel free to ask me. The second major part of the report deals with the town comprehensive plan. And it talks about the importance of the comprehensive plan and the relationship of that plan to the zoning ordinance and the regulations that attempt to implement that plan in more detail. I've identified 3 of the 8 or 9 elements of the plan: land use, coastal management, and recreation open space, as those most pertinent to the specifics of this request for amendment. It identifies some of the key policies in terms of land use, encouraging, for example, the town encourage balanced land use mix designed to assure compatible neighborhoods. It does the same thing under coastal management and conservation. And a key element there that we'll talk about in more detail is policy 334 that talks about not increasing density in the coastal high hazard area, but except for a balancing of the 9 separate criteria that are identified there. And we've attempted to do that in the report by pointing out issues with respect to each one. I should note in saying that, that all of the town is in the coastal high hazard area. It's not unique to this specific parcel. With respect to recreation open space, again, a number of the policies that are relevant to your consideration tonight are identified. And most importantly, perhaps, policy 111 talks to maintaining and increasing the community's open space character by providing public and private open space for active and passive recreation, visual relief, scenic values, and screening and buffering purposes. It goes on to enumerate some of the other important open space policies. What's important about those is to take them in their totality as examples of the statements in your plan that express the long-term desires of the community for future growth and development. Each of these policies is important, but they need to be viewed in context and in combination. And that leads then to the zoning ordinance itself. By their very nature, goals, policies, and objectives are somewhat broad and general, and they may even sometimes compete with each other. The fact is that when you look at the zoning ordinance, it gets down to the details. How do you apply the specific categories that are being requested? And it's helpful to understand what the real life implications are then of the rezoning that goes along with the land use plan amendment. And so we've enumerated some of those. Obviously, both the plan and the code call for the two to work in unison. There are 2 separate ordinances in front of the board tonight. I think we've talked about before, considering them both at the same time because they are linked. But when you get to the point of ready to make a motion and take a vote, I would recommend you separate the 2, voting first on the land use plan amendment. And if that's approved, then the zoning ordinance that accompanies it. It identifies under the zoning the specific uses that are allowed in recreation open space. And those are important to understand. They're listed here. I won't recite them all, but basically public beach, public access, miniature golf course, tennis, shuffleboard, swimming clubs, and we'll deal with those in more depth if you would like. The principal standards that apply to that are building height of not more than 15 feet and a floor area ratio of 0.25 or 1/4 of the property there could potentially be within a structure. The medium high density residential category, by contrast, allows for 15 dwelling units per acre, a building height of 45 feet as a standard requirement, and allows for bonuses potentially of up to additional units of 20 and 25 units an acre, depending on meeting certain thresholds, and a building height of that would correspond at 55 and 65 feet to those potential bonus provisions. I would point out that those bonus provisions are not in play tonight because there is no site plan that is required in order to be eligible to consider those bonus provisions. And they are not a given. They may be earned, is the language in the code, if the town considers them to have merit. So clearly and openly, the change from open space to medium high density residential portends a significant change in terms of the use of the property and the density intensity of that use on the property. All of that subject to the details of the site plan review process in section 90-110 of your code at a later date. I've identified under part C on page 10 an overview of the applicant's representations. When Mr. Pressman submitted his applications, he submitted a number of statements of support and additional language that I've gone through and frankly have taken exception to a number of those statements in terms of their accuracy and completeness and whether or not they were relevant to the point that he was attempting to make. I won't parse each and every one of those, but two of the most important ones are it's represented time and again in the application and his supporting information that this amendment is valid because it limits the development potential to 10 dwelling units. That is accurate if the ultimate standard is 15 units an acre, absent any bonus that might later be applied for and considered. So it's important to qualify that point at each step of the way, that absent a stipulation from the applicant definitively limiting it to 15 units an acre and 4 stories, the board needs to understand that the potential exists, good, bad, or indifferent, for it to be larger than that and higher than that at some point in time. The statement is made a number of times, excuse me, throughout the report, throughout Mr. Pressman's supplement to the report, that it's consistent with what's there on either side of it. Well, we've qualified that with the addendum. We know there is at least this small strip of land on the north side of the property that is now zoned for public open space recreation. And it isn't the same as the other properties. It isn't the same in size. It's obviously much smaller than, for example, the Sea Oats property in the north or Angler's Cove on the south. And it isn't entitled to the same things that they are entitled to, given their historical entitlements. For example, there are a number of units in both of those two neighboring condominiums that have short-term rentals. Whatever is built here would not have that prerogative. It's no longer allowed in the code. And so it's not accurate to say you're just seeking what everybody else has got, because that's not the case. The same observations have been made with respect to the coastal management and conservation element and the recreation open space. I just direct the board's attention to those to make sure that if there is any question in your mind about whether those statements are accurate and relevant, that we look at those in detail as you see fit. The point here is to make sure you have as complete and accurate information as I can provide. Based on that information and my analysis, I've tried to consolidate that or bring it to some degree of closure under the findings, starting with the summary on page 13. And I've done that by breaking it down into maybe 4 main headings. How does it relate first to the current plan and zoning categories? And my comment in the report that I stand by is that those current designations, open space, recreation, and outdoor recreation public open space zoning, are consistent with and support the comprehensive plan. There's nothing wrong with the categories that are there now. There's no conflict. There's no inconsistency with the objectives in your plan and the purpose and relevance of that existing plan category. We need to point out, in fairness to the applicant, that a lot of that designation, in fact, on the 1981 Ordinance 8110, that updated and revised your zoning ordinance in its entirety, labeled that specific property pier parking on the zoning map. It's relevant in the sense that it was classified that way based on what was there at the time. That has changed. We know the pier is largely gone. The parking lot that we're really talking about, the upland area, is still there. It appears to be closed. It doesn't appear to be maintained or used on any regular basis. And it is fair to note that there is provision under the county ordinances and in state, the Department of Environmental Regulation, if someone chose to construct a pier pursuant to all those requirements, including getting a new land lease, which expired, submerged land lease, which expired in 2017, that's possible. So because the pier is gone, that's the reality of it. It doesn't mean there couldn't be one there. There is provision in the town zoning ordinance, if a property is developed, to attempt to preserve some component of recreation open space, whether it's by easement or the land dedication units provision in the code. So again, in saying that the recreation open space category would go away and something else might replace it, it doesn't mean that some aspect of it could not be preserved in some form. But we also recognize you're not going to, by changing the zoning, you're not going to preserve 3/4 of an acre of quote open space on the Gulf of Mexico. And that's mighty hard to replace. The basis for approving the amendment is several-fold. It's specific language in the code. Chapter 90, Part 5 says that it will be based on changed or changing conditions, community need for additional lands to be so classified, and any benefits to the community. The applicant really hasn't addressed those specifically. Now, he's alluded to them, in fairness to him again, that the pier's gone. That's certainly a change in the last couple of years. But there is not really any direct language that speaks to those other requirements for a finding that there is a basis for making a change. He does note that the pier is no longer there, and we recognize that. He has addressed the issue in policy 334 of the fact that while your policy says we won't increase any density in the coastal high hazard area, the fact of the matter is we would be doing that here. But it also says to balance those 9 criteria as determined applicable and significant to the subject amendment. And in my evaluation, at least, when you look at all 9 and weigh them with the limitation that would be imposed, given the size of the property and the 15 units an acre, with 10 dwelling units, that impact is going to be minimal. And is not significant, in my view, relative to the purpose of those overall criteria. The consistency and compatibility of the amendment. I don't think there's any disagreement that, in fact, changing the recreation open space to medium high density residential and zoning at RM15 would be consistent with the larger area that surrounds it. We've noted the exception, the pedestrian easement and access way, the walkway that's there on the north. But be that as it may, there's a significantly larger area, some 18 acres of high density residential north and south of the subject property. May I get a drink of water before I? Thank you. My voice is bad enough without me burning you with that. And last, as to the density intensity, I've probably already spoken to that. The 15 dwelling units an acre provision in the zoning would allow for 10 dwelling units. The size of the property combined with that density, in my mind, speak to the reasonableness of the request. I also say, and it's important to note for the record and for your consideration, any future deviation from that standard, meaning the 15 units an acre and the 45 feet, I think would need to establish that it's in the public interest to do so. The policy of the comprehensive plan limit any increase. So we want to limit any increase we do approve to the minimum necessary. The location and configuration of the parcel in relationship to the Gulf of Mexico and its size and actually its shape, the narrowness of the parcel, all speak to what's reasonable in terms of the size of the development that goes on the property. And lastly, the applicant has represented throughout his information that there is no bonus or variance to the 15 units an acre requested. I think all of those speak to the reasonableness of limiting it to what is in front of us today. So based on what I found, my interpretation, I've concluded that while the existing recreation open space designation is important and recognized in our report, the fact of the matter is the pier is gone, and to date, no known action has been taken to replace it. The applicant's rationale for proposed reclassification is, I think, consistent and compatible with what's around it. And again, the size and density limitation of the category will ensure that any impact offsite is minimal. And based on that, I've recommended that ordinance Land Use Plan Amendment 21 and the corresponding zoning amendment, case Z20-1, be approved. I hasten to point out at the last meeting, and I want to do it again, that that's my recommendation to you as your helper, if you will. It doesn't mean you're in any way bound or limited by that. I go to great lengths to point out that you can come to your own conclusions based on what you deem to be relevant and findings that you make relative to those considerations, and make whatever recommendation you deem appropriate to your town commission. So I want to hold off on any questions you may have of me if I can, and in particular to elaborate if there's a need to do so, because there were questions about this last time, on the basis for me reaching my recommendation, given the findings, given the information that I presented to you, as well as the issue of the conditions that have been talked about. And I'm not sure where that stands between the applicant and the adjoining property owners until after the applicant's been heard and those interested immediate adjoining property owners. Then I'd be glad to address any questions you have of me. But that's at your pleasure. I'll do it now if you want, but I've taken some considerable time here, and what I want to elaborate on will probably take as much time.
I think I prefer to ask you questions now.
Okay.
If the board has any questions.
Sure.
Mr. Bailey?
I had a question for you.
Ask the questions from last time you were here last time too.
I was not here last time.
Yes.
My question is on, in the paperwork, I'd noticed that there's other green spaces in the township, but all of them are owned by the township. This is the only privately owned green space currently. Is that correct?
I don't know that that is correct. I know there are bayside beach access points. I know there are other easements that are designated as green on the map. I can't speak to whether or not they're privately owned or not. They may be, if they're just easements, they may be over private property. But in terms of ownership, I'm not aware of another site that is privately owned in its entirety and designated for
matches this
recreational
type of
open space.
property.
Yes, sir.
Unique in that it is different.
Yes. Mhm.
May I say something? It isn't the only privately owned, it's a 3-foot walkway, it's privately owned.
Yes, that is correct. The ownership interest, the 3-foot ownership that was transferred to the Gay Shores subdivision and first addition to Gay Shores subdivision in 1953 is owned by title and fee simple, I guess, with an interest to those property owners in the Gay Shores subdivision. So that is privately owned to that extent and limited to their use.
But it's not a green space like we're discussing green spaces. It's a walkway, not an entertainment space.
That's true.
green space
Not a
is-
developable site, perhaps, is a better way to distinguish them. Yes, sir.
It is recreational open space though.
It is
It's
zoned
the
that
only
way.
independently owned recreational open space
There's-
as it sits.
There are a lot of recreational open spaces throughout the county that are privately owned.
In Redington Shores?
I don't know about the town. I know that they do exist. It's not that unusual.
Yeah, there are oftentimes there are components of a private development, a condominium project or otherwise, that set aside lands for their private amenity package, if you will, that are classified recreation open space. And it was part of the trade-off usually in approving the plan to aggregate the units that would have been attributed to that, to the remainder of the site.
Mr. Healy, would you please confirm with us again that you have no relationship with the applicant or its consultant?
No relationship unless it's a bad one. No, I have no affiliation with Mr. Pressman. I think you'll see that in my report, my additional comments, I've probably disagreed with him more than I've agreed, but no, there is no conflict of interest whatsoever. I'm here at the town's behest.
Thank you.
I'm good right now, thanks.
So I have my notes from last time, so I'm just gonna ask you the same
Sure.
questions. Thanks for starting over. So previously you stated that our comp plan is a good comp plan. Would you still agree that that is true?
I do, yes. It's very well done.
So you also said that your recommendation for this is based on the fact that it's consistent in land use with things surrounding it. But you also pointed out several areas that it really wasn't consistent and noted that they haven't really made a basis for making a change or established any kind of public benefit or anything like that in their application. Is that correct?
I think that's correct to this extent, Madam Chair, and that is that they have not specifically enumerated under something called changed or changing conditions. They haven't identified any community benefit nor any particular need for additional residential. I think implied in a lot of what they've said, they've certainly implied that conditions have changed on that property for that property owner to the extent that the pier that was the primary basis, I guess, for the parking lot that we're actually talking about is gone.
And you mentioned that this would not negatively impact, individuals and evacuations and sheltering and things like that. Do you have a degree in emergency management?
I do not, and I didn't represent that. I took that at the word of Mr. Jones, I believe, at the county, that apparently passed that information along through Mr. Pressman. And I did confirm that with Mr. Jones.
Okay, and I just want to confirm, there is no redevelopment master plan or anything associated with this, so they can come back and ask for more. This is just approving land use and zoning changes, but it's really open-ended. There's not a plan in place.
Yes, open-ended to the extent that it's limited to the additional bonuses that are enumerated. It's not, they can't change the uses that are allowed. They can come back and ask for more density and more height pursuant to a specific site plan that would go through the same process: notification, public hearing, recommendation by the Planning and Zoning Board. So,
And they could also request a higher density too. They could request another land use change.
well, certainly that's always available. I don't know that there is a higher one available in the town of Redington Shores, but yes,
Okay, but no development agreement, so. none of the-
That's correct.
certain of this, okay. Let's see. And you agree that we should encourage balanced land use, a mix, and our comp plan represents that.
I do, absolutely.
And our current comp plan is good with this current future land use.
It's good in the sense that it's valid. It tracks with your policies in your plan for open space. And the zoning is consistent with the plan. There's no disparity with the current designation in that respect.
Anybody else have any questions?
I just had one question. I didn't quite understand when you went through it. You said pier parking was listed as pier parking. If we go back to pier parking, is that what you're saying?
No, my point was that like many comprehensive plan maps,
Right.
when yours was prepared pursuant to the 1985 Growth Management Act, a lot of it's based on what was there on the ground because most of the community was developed. And it recognized in notation on the map, pier parking, which leads me to believe that it was designated as it is because that's what was there. And when you look at the permitted uses, it talks about piers, marinas, and public off-street parking. So even the enumeration of the uses speak to the fact that it knew what was there and was trying to accommodate it.
Thank you.
But this zoning goes back to, I mean, I have an old zoning map here, but I mean, that rec open spaces has been almost a century old. It's been designated as that.
Well, I'm not aware of that, actually. I've seen the pre-1980 zoning map. The first time I've seen the pier property designated for open space was in the 1980 comprehensive plan and the corresponding 1981 zoning ordinance. And the pier had been there obviously for some time in 1980.
I do have a question. Can you
Yeah.
elaborate on the lease for the state submerged land for the pier? So you said that it expired in 2017, and I know this board was here previously with a similar, request. What can you tell us about that, the actual pier, and
Okay.
what can be done there?
Let me see if I can find it here. But while I'm looking for the specifics, the land lease was not maintained and current in terms of the payments that were due and I guess other conditions about its repair. And the State Department of Environmental Protection allowed the lease to expire because conditions weren't met in 2017. And it was subsequent to that then that there were a number of discussions, I guess, and actions taken to either renew it and make the necessary repairs or remove it. And ultimately, at the direction of the state, it was removed. In fact, at their expense, I believe. So the pier itself was removed just about a year ago, between March and May of 2020.
But the fact that there could be another lease there because there was a pier there once
Yes.
remains, correct?
That is correct.
Which is not the case of anywhere else necessarily in our town or other towns.
That is true. It's there's a specific provision in the county ordinance. We've talked to the county about that to reestablish a pier that existed prior to some certain date that would qualify, it appears, to be replaced under those conditions in the county ordinance, obviously subject also to getting a new land lease and approval from FDEP to construct a structure.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Bailey.
thank you.
Okay, and then we'll hear from the applicant.
Good evening, Madam Chair, board members, Mr. Denhart, Mr. Healy. First of all, I'd like to thank Sherry. This is the third time you set this up and you went through a lot of work and it's very much appreciated. Thank you. Madam Chair, I have one unusual piece or communication to make.
Name and your
Oh, thank you.
address that you've been sworn.
Thank you. Todd Pressman, 202nd Avenue South, number 451 in St. Petersburg, Florida, and I have been sworn. Madam Chair, I do have one unusual item that I'd like to raise to the board before my presentation. We would like to submit for your consideration a conflict of interest of the chairwoman, Lisa Foster, who is the chairperson of the Redington Shores Planning and Zoning Board. Now, Ms. Foster is an upstanding, hardworking county employee. She is a good working county employee with all good intentions. But it's our opinion that as Ms. Foster, who serves as the floodplain manager of Pinellas County and the vice president of Florida Floodplain Management Association, per Google, her position in the county is the highest paid placed administrator, as I understand it, regard to issues in the county regarding intensive regulation, restrictions, administration of structures, which include evacuations, coastal high hazards, and flooding zones. Now, critically, the future land use amendments that you're voting on this evening will appear for consideration before the Countywide Planning Authority, which are the Board of County Commissioners, which is the jurisdiction that Ms. Foster serves in her position. It will also go to the Ford Pinellas Board, of which several county commissioners also sit on. The review by these boards, in our opinion, is a direct conflict of interest with Ms. Foster's daily personal responsibilities, which are handled very well, and the town's pending land use issues. These issues will again appear before the town council in the final vote if the votes are successful and get back to the town at the very end. Ms. Foster serves to protect coastal and floodplain residents from these above stated concerns and extends her expertise and responsibilities through all of Pinellas County and the state as Vice President of the Florida Floodplain Association for items such as public information and public assistance efforts. With great respect to Ms. Foster, again, who is a diligent, hardworking officer of the county, it is our opinion that her personal responsibilities daily clearly call conflict of interest with the pending zoning and land use issues that you have heard discussed already and that she has already questioned Mr. Healy and questioned intensely immediately at the first board hearing. I've been prepared by the attorney I'm working with, reviewing Florida statutes of conflict of interest, which read Florida Statute 286.012, meetings of governmental bodies, a member of a county or municipal government board shall vote unless with respect to any such member, there is or appears to be a possible conflict of interest. If the official decision, ruling, or act occurs in the context of a quasi-judicial proceeding, a member may abstain from voting on such matters if the abstention is to assure a fair proceeding free from potential bias or prejudice. So in regard to that presentation, we would ask consideration by Ms. Foster to consider recusing herself in this request. Thank you.
And Mr. President, I'm surprised you didn't bring this up before the hearing started. I know you sent something, a letter, but I'm surprised you didn't raise this issue before the board heard the first part of the public hearing.
Well, I was.
Who is the attorney that you're speaking of?
Jacqueline, I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, but she's the daughter of the owner.
Well, I've sent this up to the county attorney, who has provided her opinion that there is no conflict of interest. In my position at the county as the floodplain administrator, I oversee the floodplain management program for unincorporated Pinellas County. I have no jurisdiction whatsoever over Redington shores, and I have no personal gain in this matter. So I do not see a conflict of interest. The attorney at the county did not see a conflict of interest. Mr. Denhart, you want to speak on it?
I read your comments and I did not see that rose to a level of an ethical conflict of interest pursuant to Florida Statute 286 that would preclude Ms. Foster from participating. Independently, I understand that she spoke with Jewel Cole, the county attorney, who apparently rendered that same opinion directly to her. So it's up to Ms. Foster whether she wishes to, whether she feels she has any conflict of interest.
Yes, sir. We appreciate your consideration.
Okay, I don't see that my education, background, or experience would be a conflict of interest here. I think it serves as a benefit to the county and to this board, and it would not be a conflict because I'm knowledgeable on the topic.
That's your determination, and we appreciate your consideration, and I'll move forward with the presentation. If I may ask the gentleman to my right, can you see that screen okay, gentlemen?
I sure can. Thank you.
Okay. So this is case 20-1 and Z20-1. Your town consultant has spoke extensively about it. I'm going to review quite a number of points, add some, and clarify some, and I will move forward. Let's hope this button works. There we go. I think we're all very familiar with the location and where the property is located and what it looks like. Looking a little closer. Property appraised as 0.722 acres. The application request future land use amendment to residential high and rezoning to RM15, which is my understanding, those are the highest categories in the city. The only uses allowed by this rezoning is single or multifamily homes and city-owned or run parks or playgrounds. That's the only uses permitted under this submittal. Now, I do want to stop for a moment and clarify the middle line where I note the owner's intent is 10 condos. I want to be very clear because that was stated not correctly. As Mr. Healy said, we are here requesting a zoning and land use category. and we will meet or match the maximum potential is 10 units on this property. We are not capping the number of units by that statement. And when I put this, a copy in the record, I'll make sure that's written as well. But there's been a lot of discussion about this. The only thing, and Mr. Healy confirmed, the only thing that's before you is a zoning and land use category that has a maximum per 15 units per acre, which would, by the math, by the size of the property, would allow a maximum of 10 units. So we're not capping that amount. There's been a lot of discussion about this being open-ended. And with great respect, this is not open-ended. This is a firm zoning and land use category. There's no bonuses, there's no variances before you. Like any other property existing or may come before you, any property can come back and potentially ask for variances or bonuses. But we're not doing that here tonight, and we're not precluding what may happen in the future. And as Mr. Healy said, there are no transient rentals or hotel short stays. Those are not permissible. It's also very critical to know that the entire town is in a coastal high hazard. Madam Chair and board members, that means every single property that comes in for a permit, every property that comes before you is in the coastal high hazard. That means that this property is no different than any other. And if your opinion or your thought with great respect is that you should preclude anything in the coastal high hazard, you will literally be shutting down this town. That's an equalization through the entire town. Now, I did speak with Mr. Cleve Jones. Mr. Healy said he confirmed that with him. He is in charge, or he is an employee of the Pinellas County Emergency Management Office. He stated that there is sufficient capacity for public emergencies such as a hurricane. Past uses appear, quite frankly, Madam Chairman and board members, it's not economically feasible, nor is it realistic for a private property owner to provide open space, green area for a municipality or a county. That's the responsibility of the local government, to provide park area, open space for its citizens. My understanding is the prior rezoning that came in, which was for a large hotel, I think it was 90 hotel units, was a restaurant and bar, was soundly and tremendously opposed by the citizenry. I wasn't involved with that. So we looked at that and said to ourselves, what would be the fair, what would be the consistent, what would be the best use for this property, considering all the neighbors and what's around there. And very clearly, we're asking for what's on either side. We are asking for the same exact future land use category and zoning categories as the abutting properties and most in the vicinity. And Mr. Healy has taken me to task a number of times about some comments in the application about being equal or having the same as the property owners on both sides. That's all that's meant, is that we have the same zoning category and future land use category as everybody else. So when you look at this map, Madam Chairman and board members, this is your future land use map, and the little green square, or little green rectangle is us. When we're seeking to be the same as everyone else, that literally is 18 square miles of consistent, homogeneous, unbroken future land use category of residential high. It is the predominant zoning, or excuse me, future land use category in Redington Shores. All you have to do is look at your paper maps there. That is the predominant category. In terms of zoning map, same thing. The green rectangle is the property under consideration. What we're seeking to do is be the same color. That's 18 square miles of consistent, homogeneous, unbroken zoning category RM15. And quite frankly, leaving the property as it is now would be spot zoning. Under the definition of Redington Shores, spot zoning is any zoning different from the zoning property on both sides of the subject property. Spot zoning is abhorred in planning. In fact, quoted here, West Encyclopedia of American Law, spot zoning is invalid because it amounts to an arbitrary, capricious, and unreasonable treatment of a limited area within a particular district and is therefore a deviation from a comprehensive plan. Emphasis. Now, we have met and discussed with both abutting owners. I met with the property owners or the HOAs on both sides of us. We wanted to reach out to the neighborhood, tell them exactly what was going on, try and work with them as best we can. And quite frankly, what we're asking for is far less in terms of use to either side of this property. By my calculation, on one side, they enjoy 33 units per acre. Other side, they enjoy 25 units per acre. That's stated as 10 units per acre. That's incorrect. We're asking for 15 units per acre. That's my error. Now, we have requested a condition after meeting with the neighbors on one side. Mr. Pergolesi is here. It was, quite frankly, pretty much generated by the neighbors. The one condition is that the pool and pool deck would be placed on the Gulf side of the property between the Gulf and the proposed condominiums. That would push the building further back from the Gulf, which was a desire of those neighbors. And we're happy to meet that condition. And we are asking your consideration, if you move forward with approval, we're asking your consideration to include that condition. Now, we took another step. We hired a private planning consultant, Ortiz Planning Solutions. I'm going to put her report and her resume in the record. We asked her to review all this. After Mr. Healy came to a recommendation supporting the application on balance of what was proposed, we had Ms. Ortiz do the same thing. She tells you in her report that the request is appropriate as it will allow development which conforms with the existing residential beachfront neighborhood. Furthermore, the small size of the lot will limit the residential density to a maximum of 10 dwelling units, which will not significantly affect hurricane evacuation times or hurricane shelter capacity. Careful consideration has been given to the town's intent regarding development as outlined in the comprehensive plan and development regulations, particularly Part 5 zoning, as well as the history of the property. And it is concluded that the requested land use amendment, zoning reclassification, residential use of the land is the most appropriate. Mr. Healy, who's the town's planning consultant, I must say Mr. Healy is very esteemed in the county. Mr. Healy ran the agency, which at that time was called Pinellas Planning Council, that handled every future land use amendment that came through Pinellas County for I don't know how many years. I used to appear before him for a long time. It must have been 20 years plus. I don't know. I tried to look it up, but he's kept himself off the web pretty well. So you have literally one of the most esteemed consultants with tremendous respect who has recommended support, and we're presenting a second qualified planner to do the same. Mr. Healy tells you that based upon the enumerated findings, it is the conclusion of this report that on balance, the subject applications are sufficiently consistent with the relevant considerations of the comp plan and zoning to qualify for approval. It is my recommendation, therefore, the land use amendment, zoning amendment should be approved. Critically, on balance, it's very easy to pick up the town's comprehensive plan. It's about this thick, ladies and gentlemen. It's pretty thick. And it's very easy to go through and cherry pick 2 or 3 policies that support your position. But as Mr. Healy emphasized and the private planner emphasized, those have to be taken into account. By my count, weighing all the balance, all the policies and code items, there's about 30 presented in total. Mr. Healy also tells you the importance and value of the current open space regulations must be balanced with the recognition that the long pier has existed for many years and was the focus, but has been removed, as he told you. The application's rationale for the proposed reclassification will allow for consistent compatible land use and zoning map designations. The increase in density that will potentially occur in the coastal high hazard area based on the size is, and its minimum density of 15 units per acre is minimal. Will not assert changing conditions in the area of the amendment, will not create a disparate, inconsistent, or potential incompatible land use, consistent and compatible designations. The increase in density is minimal. Those are conclusions rendered by 2 independent AICP professional planners with years of experience. So with that, we appreciate your consideration. I want to place emphasis again that the only request before you is the zoning and the land use. It is not, quote, an open-ended application. What's before you is very concrete and is presented in the most positive and spirited manner possible. We appreciate your consideration. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Driscoll. Board, do we have questions? We'll start. Do you have anything?
Not right now.
Well, I guess I have questions or comments. When you're talking about, you're showing your map and the turning everything brown, but you're also turning over that 3-foot walkway that goes through there, which is on your north side of the property you're talking about. So,
Well, I'm sorry, your question, sir?
I mean, and if your definition of spot zoning is it's not on both sides of the property, it doesn't have the same thing, then it wouldn't be spot zoning if that walkway has the same zoning as on this property, would it?
What you're speaking, with all due respect, sir, what you're speaking about is a hair of easement or a hair of a line compared to an 18-acre consistency. I think that's a fair representation. I understand we may disagree, but this is a forgotten little path that was suddenly found after our last meeting that is, as I understand it, nothing more than a sidewalk. I would say with great respect to you, I don't think that's something you can place a balanced decision on compared to 18 acres of consistent land use and zoning.
Can we ask you questions about your Miss Ortiz's?
I'm happy to answer any question that I can for you, sir. And I also say, I also have Mr. Joe Leck here. Joe is with the architectural firm. He's been helping us on some more details, and he's happy to be here this evening as well.
Okay, let's see. You talk about, or she talks about, under the future land use. It talks about minimizing the threat to health, safety, welfare, nuisance, incompatibility, land uses, and environmental degradation. What's environmental degradation? That's in top of part page 3.
Top of page 3.
Yes, sir.
Which policy?
Oh, okay. It is under the future land use part 1, goal 1.
I think I believe what she's doing there is just stating that policy. I think she's stating part 1, future land use. That is one. She's just referring to one potential or one existing policy in the plan, sir.
Okay. Just, you might want to fix it under, down also toward the bottom of page 3, there's part 2.
Bottom
Coastal
page.
management conservation element, and it lists as Indian shores.
What page are you on, sir?
Page 3 still.
And where are you there?
Part 2, the bottom of the page.
I think that might have been a typo. I saw that too.
Well, it's not a typo, but.
Indian Shores is a
wrong. I'm just
beachfront.
saying They might want
Right.
to clean it up is what I'm saying. It's just like.
They,
trying to
they
help
say
them out.
Indian Shores instead of Redington Shores,
Oh.
one place in there.
That's just an error from Ms. Ortiz, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to point that out. to you.
I appreciate you pointing it out. Thank you.
Are you submitting your report as evidence?
I've already
He
sent
said he
it.
would.
I've already sent it in, but I have copies I do want to put.
Planner's not here to be questioned.
I have the report to put in the record, and it's been submitted into the record already, but I have a copy with that.
Planner, is your planner
The
available?
planner's not here now. And I have a copy of the PowerPoint to also put in the record with the clarification on that one page.
It's been submitted, but it's not in evidence. And just because you send something to town, it needs to come in evidence before the board. So
I have it here to submit, and it was submitted to Sherry some time ago.
but that doesn't put something in evidence during this quasi judicial hearing.
I submitted it twice. I've requested it to be part of the record and referred to it.
We have the report.
You have the report
Yeah,
already. It's
we-
part of the record.
Mhm.
I mean, we,
They have the report. I think what the chair or somebody asked was whether the consultant whose report that is here to be cross-examined or questioned.
She is not here now.
Okay.
So should we keep going or stop?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Just wanting to know where we're at.
You're still asking questions.
Okay, under on page 5, Down from the top, number B, cuts back the utilization of planned infrastructure and says response. The amendment requests will utilize existing infrastructure, not require public expenditure to cover the cost of new unplanned infrastructure.
Yes, sir.
And I'm like, okay, do we know that there aren't going to be any traffic, lights or anything like that going in? And what about water and sewer? How do they make that statement?
Water and sewer obviously running along the roadway. There's water and sewer on both sides. 10 units is absolutely de minimis for impact on a roadway of this nature.
On the roadway, but on the water and sewer, I mean, we're doing all this stuff with sewers in our town and struggling with that to some extent. So I just wondered if they talked to anybody about capacity or how close we were to capacity or anything like that.
I would say with you, with all due respect, this is a zoning hearing. I understand you're asking about the comp plan, and that is an item on the comp plan. I think it's more than reasonable to assume water and sewer are available on both buildings on either side, and 10 more units to tap into the city's capabilities would be de minimis.
Okay. Can you, on number
This
6?
isn't just a zoning hearing. It does involve, you've requested an amendment to the comprehensive plan.
I did
involve both.
I did say it involves the comp plan, and I referred to that this is a policy that is being discussed. I didn't mean to imply anything else.
Under C, right after, under that one, the response is requested amendments will result in utilization of existing disturbed area as opposed to nature areas which buffering exists development from storms. And I guess I didn't understand what that meant. Can you explain that to me, please?
It's my understanding that there is some dune area that has built up
Yes,
on the property, is my understanding.
yes.
That would obviously be changed. It would have to be mitigated if that's the case.
So the dune would have to be removed, or?
My understanding is that it would have to be mitigated. So if there is a requirement for it to be modified, the property owner or developer would have to mitigate or compensate for that change.
Okay, what happens to the part of the dune that's over on in front of the 3-foot walkway and extends on over into Statutes?
We had a short conversation about that. And again, the best answer and complete answer I can give you is that if there is a requirement for it to be to go into that area for construction or for development, the engineers would have to mitigate for that effect. They would have to compensate for whatever the protection that sand dune creates or allows.
Okay. Sorry, let's come through this. I guess that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Answer all your questions? Did I answer all your questions, sir?
Well, sure. We'll
Thank
go
you.
with that.
I may not agree, but I just want to be sure I answered
No, I'm
your
not
question.
saying whether I agree or not. In some of it, I may not quite understand what you're saying when you're saying, mitigated. And what's the definition of that? But that's fine.
Thank you, sir.
Not yet.
All right, so you mentioned cherry picking.
Yes, ma'am.
And the only thing that I had seen that supports this is that there's a similar land use and zoning on the other sides. And you showed, the 18 square miles, I believe you said, of contiguous, but without some sort of rec open space, it goes completely against many more elements within the comp plan. Mr. Healy himself pointed out several of those items. The rec open space element itself was neglected in your presentation. So so the town encourages balanced land use mix, and then their open space policy talks about maintaining or increasing the community's open space through public and private partnerships. And Mr. Healy advocated for that too in his own report. So speaking of cherry picking, what were the other components of the comp plan that actually support this?
Well, you have Mr. Healy's report in front of you. He reviews all the policies. He, as an expert, comes to a conclusion that on balance, the consistency, and I'm not speaking for Mr. Healy, but just in summary, his report tells you that on balance, what's requested under the applications is supportable, and he recommends approval.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back to cherry picking again, because I believe in your report, cherry picking is what you have done, is not what the intent of the comp plan is. The comp plan alludes to several things about protecting people, and we are not shutting this town down, as you stated. We are maintaining the safety of the residents here, and we are also maintaining the comp plan objectives and goals of ensuring that this is an open space for everybody's enjoyment. I mean, it's well documented in planning documents, and I'm surprised that there wasn't more about this in the reports. I'm a little disappointed. You know, we've got this good comp plan, and there are a lot of towns that cap the density. There's very few remaining opportunities for both front open space, and we have a lot of privately owned recreational open space areas. Golf courses are the most popular one, of course, in Florida. I just don't see the justification for making the change. So I guess in your own words, what is the justification for doing this?
The best justification I can give you are Mr. Healy's report, who is an esteemed member of the planning community, and the private planners. They have fastidiously, clearly, and completely reviewed all the comp plan amendments and have recommended to you, this board, that the applications proposed are supportable and valid and credible. They said it much better than I.
What is the benefits of the town? If the board approves this, what is the benefits of the town?
Well, I think there's benefit with all residential development. It is, number one, a taxable property that increases in value. It's a property that's not left in disrepair and broken down and fenced and an eyesore to the community. It's a property that can be developed in a very responsible way, that additional people can become good citizens of Redington Shores and enjoy the lifestyle here and enjoy the beach and enjoy a life on a home at a very nice property.
So do you think that there's
That's
economic benefit to a recreational use?
I think when you look at a recreational use, in my personal opinion, and again, looking at the opinion of the professionals who presented it to you, they differ with you, with all due respect. And my personal opinion is that really residential property can be as positive and be supportive of a community as well as recreational can be. But I'll repeat this again, my opinion, it's not up to a private property owner to provide open space for a municipality or a county. That's responsibility of the government to collect taxes and purchase property like Hillsborough County, Preservation 2000, Swiftmud, which I served for a while. They collect tax dollars and they place easements on properties for open space, or they collect tax monies and they buy properties that they consider to be good open space properties. That's not up to individual property owners to provide that for the public good.
Was your client aware of what the land use and zoning was when he purchased the property?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
And you said your planner's not here to answer questions, so I'm not sure that we can actually accept the report as a record, can we? Without the planner here for questioning?
It's up to the board whether to accept it in evidence or not. If you feel that it, you know, without being able to cross-examine or ask questions of the planner, that you don't wish to accept it, that's your all's prerogative to decide whether you're going to accept it or not. It's not me.
But wasn't that a supplemental report that they did on their own in addition to this? Is
No,
that how you explained it?
What I indicated was that I have already submitted the report to Sherry and the planner's resume, which she accepted, but I have a copy of it that I also wanted to put in the record tonight.
So we have a copy of it, but the planner's not here for us to ask questions about it. So we don't have to accept it because we can't ask questions about it.
I mean, I'm fine with it.
Does any board member have an issue with accepting it without the planner being here for questions?
I certainly don't. I speak for itself.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I read it thoroughly and I think it was comprehensive.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, board members.
All right, thank you.
Do you want me to submit this to you or to Sherry?
Just one moment.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask a few questions if I could. And you may
Please.
not have the answers, but how, I'm not sure I understand what condition 1 and 2 mean. If we approve it, these conditions are a part of the approval
Yes, and I did,
and they
dis-
can't, and they're
What
enforceable?
page are you on?
I did discuss this to, you mean the condition about the pool, sir?
Yeah, the condition about, no, condition number 1 and condition number, there's 2 conditions that you've
Yeah.
enumerated,
And that's been changed. We are only proposing the one condition.
only 1.
I have had communication with Mr. Denhart to ask in what process or how we would like that done. He was not happy with one of the conditions, which is fine. We respect that. So the only condition we're proposing is, as I indicated, was that the pool would have to be between the Gulf and the condominiums.
So that's if you develop the property or if you sell it and a developer would come in and
They would have to comply with that condition.
it
Now,
goes with the property.
yes, yes, sir. To my understanding, yes, sir.
Well, we don't have a development plan. We have no site plan whatsoever. So the zoning is all we're voting on. We're voting on zoning and land use. There is absolutely no site plan, so there would be no tie to.
So
We can't put conditions.
So the
along with it.
conditions
Well,
aren't, they're not valid.
The conditions are not included
They have
in the
no,
zoning change, no.
I communicated with Mr. Denhart some time ago about this, and he indicated that, I'm not going to speak for you, sir, that
Please don't.
my understanding was that we could submit a condition as involved with the presentation, and that can be included in the order. That's why I proceeded in that manner.
You inquired, let me correct things.
Please.
You inquired whether you might be able to put some self-imposed conditions on the application that maybe this board might recommend and maybe the town commission might ultimately incorporate. And I indicated to you, did I not, that it was up to the applicant if you wish to submit any self-imposed conditions. You then came out with 2 conditions, and one of them, it said that the town would share the cost of getting rid of any pilings or portions of the pier. And I said, that's something that this board can't really commit. That would be up to the town commission. They may or may not wish to do that. They haven't considered that. So it wasn't that I wasn't happy with the condition, and I've told you all along, I think, and please correct me if you disagree, but I think I've told you all along that you could do any self-imposed conditions that you wanted. But initially you were going to self-impose, if I'm not mistaken, that the development, any development in the future would be limited to 10 units, but it sounds as if you've kind of backed off that.
No, that's incorrect, sir. With all due respect, we had no time said we were going to restrict the number. In regard to the pier, we would never we never dreamed to place a condition that the city would pay for it. In any case, that's very clear. We never expected the city pay for it. In any case, that has been eliminated. We're not asking that at all. The only condition that we're asking for consideration, which I understood was in process or in consideration, is the element of the pool, location between the Gulf and the building, which was generated from the neighbors.
The reasoning was that was to please your neighbors. Really, that's why you're.
That-
putting the
that's correct,
condition
sir.
in there is to please
That's the only reason it was generated.
But we don't have a development plan. We have no site plan.
and that's my
There's no
question.
agreement. So this is only land use and zoning change. So, and they can come back with requests for variances and everything else after the land use and zoning change occurs.
But I think the point is that they were proactively attempting to work with the neighboring properties and proactively putting those conditions in where they didn't need to do that.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
That's agreeable, but they're not enforceable. So what's the point?
Goodwill. There's nothing enforceable, but it's nice
Shows
goodwill
goodwill.
offering.
I can only say I had discussions, and my understanding is we could bring a condition forward. If determined right now we can't, then we can't.
And I agree, you can bring any conditions forward, and if you wish to say that as part of your zoning application, you agree to self-impose
Yep.
conditions and state what those conditions are, then the board can consider whether in their recommendation they wish to incorporate those. And that is correct.
Okay. So then to make this statement, we are seeking to self-impose a condition as presented, of which the pool would have to be located between the Gulf and the condominium building.
But you're not self-imposing the 10 units.
Absolutely not. No, that is absolutely not the case. I made that very clear in presentation and in the record that I'll put the copy of the PowerPoint,
Any more questions?
which of course is restricted by the zoning and land use.
If I may, I think you need to clarify one thing. I'm not an advocate for or against them, but I want to make sure there's a clear record. And your PowerPoint spoke several times about 18 square miles. And you talked about 18 square acres, and I think the town's only like 1.1 mile long. So I'm not sure what, I just want to make a clarification that your PowerPoint is correct. So
I actually got that from Mr. Healy's report.
Yeah, I think it's acres I remember seeing, correct?
But I noticed on your PowerPoint, and you said in your presentation initially several times 18 square miles. So I just want to make sure the record is clear one way or
18
the other what
acres.
you're talking about.
That may have been an error. I'll ask Mr. Healy.
I'm not sure there's 18 square miles in all of the
Yep.
town of Redington.
Right.
I imagined they were going all the way down to the beach. Down
It's
into
acres, Dave.
Redington That's more developed, and it wasn't just this.
But there's not the same zone.
So we'll clarify that for you right now.
Speak to a number of his comments later.
Well, that was an error. It was an error, and we'll get that clarified for you. Thank you, Mr. Denard.
Well, I just want to make sure that
Sure.
if your PowerPoint's in evidence sometime later, that it's clarified that that part, if it's inaccurate, that it is inaccurate.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well,
Okay.
I'll just clarify one thing that was also, I think, an error in your presentation. You mentioned that the previous application was not soundly approved by residents when it was up for being a hotel or a pier. I would disagree with that. I think it was 50-50 when it came to that for residents on that. So
I wasn't involved. I just been made aware
just
that,
a point of clarity there.
no, I appreciate that. I wasn't involved at the time. I've heard many stories of lots of citizens showing up, and the residents on both sides I met with
Yep.
were horrified. So that was the impression that was given to
It
me.
was a vote of 3-2 by us, and it was pretty split.
I wasn't involved.
And so were the public comments when the hearing
Absolutely.
came to the commission. It was absolutely 50-50 for people for and people against.
I appreciate the clarification. Most of the input I got were from the residents on both sides.
Right.
So I
Well,
guess
that
that-
would be most of the
okay.
ones against.
Yeah. So I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you. Mr.
Thank you.
That
Sherry?
concludes your case, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Give this to the chair or clerk?
Sherry, do we have any written comments that haven't been received by the board?
My office has received none that have not been distributed to the board, no.
So let's roll into public comment, and I think we're gonna start in-house first before we go to online. So let's open it up for public comment then. Please state your name, address, and your interest.
Yes, I've got some handouts.
Can you submit this? Bring it back, just do it. Bring it back. Do you want to submit this for public record?
Thank you.
A lot younger now.
So what is this? Is he gonna explain it? Here. Open up here, I
May I
guess.
remove the mask?
Yes.
Okay.
like Mr. Hillington? Thank you. Good evening.
They asked you who the kid in the picture is.
The kid, I was a lot younger when that picture was taken. My name is Robert Pergolizzi, and I'm an AICP certified planner and a professional transportation planner. My resume is before you, and I did give a copy to Sherry before the hearing just to save time. I also gave you a handout of some exhibits that I put together, and some of them were actually in the application. I'm the vice president of Anglers Cove, 17450 Gulf Boulevard. We are immediately to the south, as you obviously know. What a difference a year makes. This is a much better application than they previously proposed 120 room hotel, 9-story hotel. While we like to have open space, and we'd love to see this as a city or a county park, we feel that in its current state, that the applicant, if he were denied, would probably just let this property deteriorate, which would not benefit us at all. Actually, that'd be very harmful to us. So we're kind of weighing the pros and cons of everything. Also, we don't think that the town, without help from the county, has the funds to purchase this property to turn it into a desirable city or county park. We wish that was the case. So we believe that the rezoning to RM15 is reasonable given the limits this small property has. 0.72 acres, only 100 feet wide. We are not trying to be difficult, but we need some clarity. The application that was submitted was for 10 units, no density bonus, and it clearly stated that. If you look at the handout, not the one with my kid picture on it, but the 5-page handout. This is an excerpt from the application. It says there are no variations or bonuses sought for the site development. The application was for 4 stories, 45 feet above base flood elevation, no height bonus, as stated. The staff report refers to support documentation referencing these limits, no bonuses, and states that they must be stipulated on the record. And I refer you to page 11 of Mr. Healy's staff report. I could read it, but I think that might take too much time unless you want me to. But he clearly states that the representations are meaningless unless they are stipulated. Mr. Pressman graciously, after a phone call to me, met with us at Anglers Cove on January 14th, and I appreciate him doing that. Mr. Lackey was with him too. Met with us and again told us 10 units, 4 stories over parking, no height bonus, no density bonus. At our Anglers Code board meeting, 5 days later on January 19th, we voted not to oppose this. Actually, we are not taking a formal position for or against based on those representations. And when Mr. Pressman met with us and Mr. Lackey met with us, they gave us a little handout, and that is on page 3 and 4 of the handout that I gave you. And those are my notes from that meeting that we sat on our picnic tables out by our barbecue right on site. And he met with members of the board of directors and our property manager at Anglers Cove. And based on that concept plan, we're like, all right, we're not going to oppose this. I submitted, for some clarification purposes, some potential conditions that we wanted to see put into the record and put into the zoning. And that is the 5th page of this handout. And I sent this to Mr. Healy and Mr. Denhart for consideration, and also to Mr. Pressman. And those 5 conditions will go a long way in relaxing us and clearing up some anxiety that we have about the development of this property that's only 100 feet wide. So I presented these clarifications, and Todd took them to his client, the owner, and he discussed them, and the client refused 4 out of 5 of them. The only one he approved was item 3, that the pool will be located on the west side of the proposed building between the beach and the building, and that's what he presented to you tonight. All we want at Anglers Cove, and I believe at Sea Oats, and they'll speak for themselves, is some clarity of what we're going to get. This provides assurances that he will do what he represented to us. And we ask that these conditions of approval be stipulated on the record by Mr. Pressman, or if legally allowed, to be placed as a condition, as conditions of approval in your recommendation to the town council. The pier remnant, I know we went back and forth on that. We are grateful that they took that down because it was a hazard. And we were kind of surprised that when they finished, it looked like they weren't finished. There was still a little bit left, but we've come to learn that that was not part of the land lease. So the state's contract to take it down ended right there. I think that's at the erosion control line. So whoever's property that is, cities, applicants, if this property is developed, obviously we would like to see that remnant of the pier taken down. But we know that we can't obligate anybody financially to do it. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. We would love your consideration of these 5 conditions of approval, of which item 3 he already agreed to. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I just have one question for clarification. So if these 5 things are stipulations of the change, then you would be a proponent of it. However, if these 5 things are not a stipulation, then you are not a proponent.
That sums it up, Madam Chair. Yes.
You guys have questions?
I'm still looking this over, so.
Yeah. Under 2, the part in parentheses is just me expounding for my neighbors on what height means. Because when someone says 45 feet above base flood elevation, it's not 45 feet above the ground. And my co-owners at Anglers Cove were confused about that. And I was like, no, here's what it is.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Have you noticed any uptick in activity, criminal activity, drug use, anything like that in that parking area or anything like that? I know it's fenced and it's hard to get in.
Yeah,
Is that an issue for the?
Not actually in the parking area. The remnant of the pier is still a hangout. It provides shade. And we had people hanging out under the pier, drinking, doing whatever. And then they'd come and use our private bathrooms that we had to get locks on our beach gate for our residents and visitors. I can't say I've seen any uptick in criminal activity on the property itself.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chairwoman, could we get I get a quick break to
Oh,
get some
sure.
water and use some facilities for a second?
Sure, why don't we recess for 10 minutes?
5.
That'll be fine. Let me remind all of you, you're in the middle of a public hearing, so you can't discuss anything among yourselves or with anybody else.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's reconvene and we'll carry on the public comment going to COs.
Good evening, Madam Chair and board members. My name is Mary Frances Grinnell, 17500 Gulf Boulevard, otherwise known as Statutes, and I am the president of the board. The board of directors of Statutes condos,
You
yes.
did take the oath and you were sworn earlier, correct?
Oh, yes, I was.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I meant to interrupt and ask you.
I don't know about him, but
And I think the record should reflect that everybody that's in the room here
Right.
was sworn in.
thank you. The Board of Directors of Statutes condos takes no official position on the petition to rezone the property of 17490 Gulf Boulevard, Redington Shores, Florida. However, the board strongly agrees with the conditions and clarifications set forth by the Anglers Cove Condo Board, and should you decide to recommend the rezoning, we encourage you to adopt these conditions. In addition, we have received several comments from owners at Statutes condos, which we ask you to review and read into the record. The first one, this is much more a reasonable development than the hotel that was proposed. But as I understand it, these plans were just sample plans and not reflective of what may actually be built. We have concerns that the property owner and developer may try to change these plans if you grant the zoning change. So please do not approve this zoning change until you received actual final plans for the development. Secondly, this property is the only beachfront parcel in Redington Shores that's zoned recreational. Changing the zoning may provide additional tax revenue, but the zoning board should consider the larger picture, specifically the decreased amount of open space in the town. Before approving the zoning change, the town should investigate all options for keeping this as a recreational space. Thirdly, as a direct neighbor to the pier property, we have watched the decay of the Redington Pier for many years. The property owner was so negligent in his obligation to maintain the pier that it had to be torn down. Now the same owner is looking to profit from his negligence by changing the zoning. Fourthly, we say we take no position, but some people, from some remarks from our members, are opposed to this change. The report provided by the consultants mentions the importance of open space multiple times, including these. Open space, quote, is a valid and important objective in a largely built out community. Changing zoning, quote, has the potential to have a significant bearing on the future type of use. The application, quote, does not recognize or address the loss of private recreation open space or the loss of direct visibility and access to the Gulf of Mexico that has characterized this site for many, many years. The reality is that it will be very difficult to replace or otherwise provide for the loss of such recreation open space on Gulfront property in the town. After making these factual and important statements, the consultant proceeds to, somewhat confusingly, recommend approval of a zoning change that would eliminate this recreational open space. There are important issues at stake here. So if you rezone this property, you will lose one of the only beachfront recreational spaces in our area. And lastly, I would like to comment on a related issue, which is the beach access between the pier property and the Statutes property. This access should go directly onto the beach, but it doesn't. The access cuts across the Statutes property. As a result, we have frequent issues with beach visitors coming onto our property and using our facilities. If this rezoning is approved, I ask that the development plans include rerouting the beach access to go directly onto the beach and not in front of the Statutes property. That's it. Thank you. Any questions?
Is that the property that you were talking about, the strip?
Yeah.
Isn't that
That-
privately owned? Didn't we determine that
Yeah,
was
but
privately
what she's
owned?
saying is you get to the end of the
It-
strip and then it jogs. to the
Yes, you
right.
get to the end, to the
sand.
sand, and it makes a right and goes right in front
But
of,
isn't that privately owned? Didn't we just determine that?
I don't know where the property line is.
That strip of land you said earlier was privately owned.
Strip of land, but I think if you go, it goes straight through the dune, there's a huge dune.
Okay,
there.
but when she refers to beach access, that's what you're saying is privately owned. It's not a public beach access that the town owns,
That's
correct?
correct.
So I don't see how we could have anything to do with that, is my point, if that's privately owned.
Just to clarify for the board.
yeah,
I understand that there probably are two accesses that are contiguous to each other. One is privately owned and inures to the benefit of the Gay Shores subdivision on the east of Gulf Boulevard. The other, I believe, is a 3-foot easement that was granted to the town. The first one I talked about is deeded land,
Okay.
deed.
Okay,
The second is an easement that, I'm not sure whether it's, I think it's on top of the Statutes property, that apparently the developers of Statutes deeded that.
and I personally don't know that
Notarized it.
for a fact.
I don't remember it, but I notarized it, so.
so if that's an easement, then that's
So-
public access,
So there
right?
are both,
Gotcha.
Mhm.
but the confusion is the fence there, I think is like 56 inches from fence to fence, so it's
Mhm.
not 6 foot, so.
And it does cause an issue for then people being diverted to
But
our
the
property.
extent this applicant is asking just for their
Mhm.
property, then I'm aware of your issue. I've actually walked that easement,
Mhm.
and I know the town is looking at that because you go down there and you get all the vegetation in your face. So that's something the town's looking at, but I don't think that's anything this board
Okay,
could demand at this time.
Yeah.
okay. All right, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
And next we'll hear from Sam Dixon. And for the record, he was signed in with everybody else.
Yes, I was sworn in. Sean Hatfield, 17495 Gulf Boulevard, San Vista Hotel. I think that by them putting any type of condos or high rise there is going to impact the hotel that I have and the guests and our view. It's been there since 1947. So I think there's other options that could be done with the property. He bought the property as recreational green space. I think it should stay some type of recreational green space. I don't think it should be condos. I thought what the lady said from Statutes was very well spoken. So I think the conditions that Dangler's Cove is looking for probably aren't the conditions that if you call and inquire about the property, that's not what they're insinuating. So that's it.
Could you elaborate on that? How is the property being marketed?
Well, I've inquired about it a few times because I wanted to see what their mindset was. So the last time I spoke to them, they said that they were going to try and put 40 to 60 units on there. And I don't remember how high or how tall, but so that's what I was told. And it was under contract for $6 million if that would be approved by the town, the county, the city, all of the above. So change the zoning. But it's recreational green space. If you change it, you don't get it back. You never get it back.
You guys have questions? Any questions? No? Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Okay, sure. We can do that now. Mr. Healy, did you want another opportunity to comment on anything that's been presented?
I do, Madam Chair, if I may.
And this would be Mr. Healy's rebuttal to
To the
basically
applicant.
Mr. Pressman's presentation.
I'm about to blow any of the nice things Mr. Pressman attempted to say about me. I've reviewed his PowerPoint and I have a number of comments on it and a couple that relate to the reference to the Ortiz report as well, if I may. Some of them are somewhat incidental and I'll just enumerate them. He's already touched on them or we've talked about them. On page 6, he talks about the intent versus the stipulation. That's been the ongoing discussion about the conditions. Page 9 talks about there being no economic feasibility or reasonable use of the property. That's just not something you can say absent credible testimony to that effect. I don't think Mr. Pressman is an economist. I don't think there's, at least I haven't seen any economic feasibility study. That may be his opinion. He's certainly entitled to it, but it's not factual. It's not based on anything other than an opinion without the appropriate credentials to speak to it. On pages 10, 13, and 15, again, it needs to be qualified with respect to the open space that exists on the walkway immediately north of the property, perhaps minor. It is 18 acres, not 18 square miles. The town isn't that big. Probably the most egregious statement is the one about spot zoning. I really want to turn to that. It's on page 16 or 16 of the slides. And I guess it's a state.
We don't have a copy of it. So
Okay, let me cite it and then I'll let Mr. Pressman respond if I've misinterpreted this. He first of all defines spot zoning and he attributes that to the town code. That's correct. It says any zoning different from the zoning of a property on both sides of the property. Well, that is correct on its face. He then defines, I think, another apparently taken from West Encyclopedia of American Law, the granting to a particular parcel of land a classification concerning its use that differs from the classification of other land in the immediate area. Again, fair enough. But the statement then that appears to be different in context, and I don't know if this is from Westlaw or not, that spot zoning is invalid because it amounts to arbitrary, capricious, and unreasonable treatment of a limited area within a particular district and therefore deviation from the comprehensive plan. The implication is that the existing site the Jermac property is somehow spot zoning. Well, it obviously is not on its face. It's consistent, the zoning is consistent with the plan. There is no disparity or conflict between the two. And all of the language about arbitrary, capricious, and unreasonable, I mean, these are legal terms that have to be based on a factual, definitive, concrete situation. That doesn't exist here, in my opinion, and it's just misleading, frankly, to say that. That ought to be, I think, discounted. The town code speaks to spot zoning, which it says not desirable and should be discouraged. But that's a totally different standard than that it's invalid and arbitrary and capricious. So I needed to clarify that point in particular.
Mr. Healy, can I ask you a question about the spot zoning while you're on
Sure,
that
yes.
topic? So we see all these pocket parks everywhere, which is spot zoning, but I feel like the intent of that whole definition of spot zoning is so you don't get a high rise in the middle of a, single family residential area or something like that. And it's not necessarily intended towards open areas.
That's correct. And to take the statement on its face, I mean, look at the plan map. They're all different colors. And it's based on what's there, what was defined as the existing use in the plan and the zoning. The plan and the zoning are consistent because there's a distinction as to color. Doesn't make it spot zoning. There's myriad differences up and down Gulf Boulevard based on, in fact, what's there and what should be. It's the appropriate plan and appropriate zoning. So let's not confuse the terminology. That's all, I guess, is my point. The comment on page 20, again, seems meaningless and inappropriate absent a site plan. You can't take these things out of context and make statements like that. On page 21, he refers to the Ortiz report. I have a separate comment on that. I'll come back to it. But it basically implies rezoning will limit development to 10 units an acre. And again, absent the condition or stipulation, that just is not factual. My statement that he quotes, and I do object to being quoted out of context, on page 24, the 24th slide, my statement was based on a minimal impact based on 15 units an acre, not open-ended. And there's another statement on page 25. Let me turn to that because I want to correct it for the record. It's got my title block or letterhead on the page, so it appears to be attributed to me. It says will not assert changing conditions in the area of the amendment. It completely transposes what I said. I said his application did not assert changed or changing conditions as required by the code. So it just bothers me that we play with these terms and their origin in such a loose fashion. Same thing about the statement at the bottom. The increase in density is minimal. Yes, I said that based on 15 units an acre.
Excuse me, when you say page 25, are you referring to the report or the?
I am sorry. I'm referring to the PowerPoint, the 25th slide. The pages aren't numbered, so I numbered them to correspond to the sequence. Anyway, those correct, I think, some misstatements in that regard. As to Ms. Ortiz report, you've already addressed the question of whether it's been presented and accepted into the record. The same point is made on pages 2, 4, and 8 of her report as to the density intensity. And again, it's unsubstantiated and absent a stipulation to that effect. It's really beside the point. Page 7 is a peculiar statement. It purports to argue that the subject property was not treated equally in the 1981 zoning update, in that the adjoining properties, meaning Sea Oats and Angler's Cove, were granted, quote, non-conforming status, whereas this property was not. Exactly. they had limitations imposed on them because they were non-conforming as to density and as to some of the rental units that are there that is not available to other property today. Whereas this property, the recreation open space piece, was classified exactly based on what it was. So to construe from that somehow the Germack property was disadvantaged is completely the reverse of what actually transpired at that point in time. With those comments, I'll be glad to try and answer any other questions the board has of me.
I have a question. I'm not sure if it's better addressed to Mr. Pressman, but have we been told why there isn't a site plan being submitted with this?
The only representation to us in the meetings we had leading up to the application was that they didn't have a plan. We're not ready to submit a plan, and it was their preference not to. But he can speak to that perhaps more specifically.
Yeah, there's no development agreement or anything. Just land use change request.
When you were talking about the slide, you talked about slide 20.
Yes, sir.
And I guess you said, I might have missed it, but I thought I heard you say, well, that's slide 20. And then you kind of I didn't hear what you said that was objectionable on slide 20.
You look at, I'm saying the statement was meaningless and inappropriate absent
Okay.
a site plan, without a site plan.
Okay.
Let me see what the statement was so I can be more specific. Trying to work between the report and my notes. I apologize for the confusion. Oh, with respect to the condition that's been submitted, which was generated by the neighbors. My position on the conditions is simply that absent a site plan, you're trying to plan in the abstract. To specify where the location of the pool is or setback on a given side is just not necessary, inappropriate, doesn't accomplish anything. If we're going to get down to that detail, then let's be looking at a site plan so we can really judge it. Is that where it best goes? Anglers Cove would like to have a minimum setback on their side. Well, yeah, I understand that, but maybe it needs to shift that way in the end if we're going to preserve the recreation open space pathway on the north. So let's not judge those kind of individual site plan particulars in the abstract without really looking at a plan to know what it means. I will make a differentiation, and it's certainly the board's prerogative to attach conditions or stipulations if you choose, between those site plan specific things and the more basic issue of density and height. That speaks to the larger impact on the community, on adjoining properties as a whole, and sets the framework for the development intensity that then works within the given envelope. If that's something the board wants to pursue or discuss with the applicant, fine. But in terms of the details of the site plan, it's your prerogative to set whatever limit you like. Certainly my recommendation in principle not to get into that and predetermine where some of those things would go or not go.
And you brought up, I have a question for Mr. President, was it okay now? That's something that Mr. Wheeler brought up.
Yes. Whatever the board wants to do is appropriate.
Are you guys okay with me asking?
Oh, yeah.
Sure. Okay, so-
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Healy asked if you were an economist, and I don't recall you telling us what your expertise were.
I just
Are you a land use planner? Are you an attorney?
No, I just expressed that as an opinion. No, I'm a zoning consultant, handled zoning cases for 25 years. I served on Southwest Florida Water Management Governing Board for approximately 9 years. I was chairman for a year. I was appointed by Governor Bush, served on the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. I was reappointed by Governor Christ, and also appointed by the Board of County Commissioners, served on the Charter Review Board, also appointed by the Hillsborough County Commissioners, who served on the Code Enforcement Board. So that would be my experience and expertise.
Okay. And then my other question, I'm not sure who this question is for or if it's a comment, but there were some comments thrown around about the degradation of the property from it lack of maintenance on it and from it going downhill. And I'm just wondering, isn't that something that code enforcement should just be handling? There should be code violations placed for lack of maintenance on a property.
That's a great question, because I think we've gotten a little bit away from the point that the pier is not located on this property. The pier is located on the beach, which is state-owned in some capacity. I haven't researched that, but I can show you a picture from the property appraiser that the pier is not part of this property. In regard to the other part of the property, I'm not aware of any code enforcement violations or citations that have been made. Is that it? Thank you.
Oh, if you could just answer the question that I asked Mr. Healy, why was a site plan not provided with this application?
A very simple answer. This is an extremely tight site. It is under tremendous restrictions under the zoning categories. The height is restricted, the side setbacks are restricted, the density is restricted. We are going to have to work, Joe has worked very, very diligently, scouting every inch of this property to determine what is going to be able to fit on it. It's a very tight footprint. So the site plan, quite frankly, is superfluous in our opinion, because it's very clear this is going to be a rectangle building and it's going to have 20-foot setbacks. And I can refer to Mr. Pergolesi's list at this point if you like, or that would be my answer to
Yeah,
you.
that's good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Sherry, do you want to open it up for public comment on the Zoom end?
Yes, I'll come up and read this here, instructions for Zoom participants. At this time, the meeting has been open for testimony via communications media technology. If you would like to speak, you may do so in one of two ways. If you're logged onto Zoom via your computer, there is an option to raise your hand virtually. To raise your hand, click on the icon that looks like a hand. Once you're acknowledged, the moderator will unmute your line and request video. Please click the icon to allow video and audio and wait for the chair to acknowledge you. If you are listening via telephone, the moderator will ask for public comment from individuals. Press *6 to unmute yourself. Please be patient and wait for an opening to introduce yourself and make your remarks. When it is your turn to speak, please state your name and address. The chair will ask if you have been sworn. If you've not been sworn in, I will swear you in, and you may provide your comments. Spoken comments will be limited to 3 minutes, which I think we've been pretty close.
But the individuals that are in the room are contiguous property owners or represent contiguous property owners. So all of them would be entitled to a little bit more. They have more standing to talk to than just public comments.
Do we get a cross-examination?
That would be up to the board. Are you requesting it before public comments?
Take other public comments first. Yeah. People on the phone, Zoom.
Do we have that code?
You do. Yes, you have to.
Okay.
First, you have the beginning.
They're supposed to be up here, right?
I think that's supposed to see them on the TV.
Yeah, she'll come up on the TV.
It doesn't matter.
She's got unused and allow the video, so it might just take a minute. Lisa, did you want to call on Jenny to see if she wants to contribute?
Oh, I thought the moderator was doing that.
She doesn't have a microphone in there.
Oh, okay. So Jenny, please restate your name. Please restate your name, unmute your line. That's not in the right order. And begin your video.
We can come back.
Okay. You said you had another one?
We have Shane.
Hi, Shane, please unmute your line, begin your video.
Good evening. Am I connected?
You are connected. Have you been sworn in?
I have not been sworn in.
You have?
No, it says
I have not.
Okay, Sherry will swear you in.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Please restate your name.
Thank you. My name is William Powell of 144 175th Terrace Drive East in Redington Shores, 33708. As a property owner and full-time resident of Redington Shores, I object to the rezoning. Current zoning of the land in question influenced the purchase of my property. Construction of a multi-story construction represents a potential 45-foot or higher development, directly obstructing the view of the Gulf from my property and neighboring properties along 175th Terrace Drive. This may result in reduced utility and enjoyment of the property and potential risk of depreciated property values. Development to retain this recreational open space presents the opportunity for greater foot traffic to local retail and dining. Several times during this in the first meeting, it was mentioned that mentions were made that the walkway to diminish the size and availability of the use of the walkway. I will say that the walkway provides frequent used beach access and is not blocked, with the walkway in place around the sand dune. Character of use for the west side of the Gulf Boulevard includes public beach parking and access. It is not limited to the presence of multi-unit buildings. Property was purchased under current zoning and allowed to deteriorate to the point of demolition. Those are my points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tracy, do we have anybody else? We want to go back to Jenny?
Try. I don't have a minute anymore, but we can try one more time.
Jenny, if you're up here, do you want to raise your hand so Tracy can give you access and you can unmute yourself and turn on your video? Anybody else? Okay. So we'll go to the telephone public comment now. Do we have anybody on the phone lines? We have one call. One call. Did you unmute them? I do. Okay, please state your name and your address, and you will have 3 minutes to speak. You'll probably need to unmute yourself. Star 6. Okay. And also let me know if you've been sworn in. We don't hear you.
Was star 6 to unmute?
Are they still on, Tracy, or did they? Show me the way and we still see their numbers. They're not. Okay. so, that closes public comment. Do we have staff, that want to give a final summary?
Nothing further unless there's questions.
Oh. Okay, okay.
And that's what we all do.
Yes, would we say we'd like another moment? Are you open to, are you open with that? Sure. Very open to that? Okay.
So this is not for any additional presentation by you, but you requested some cross-examination, correct?
Yeah, just a couple.
So that's up to the board whether you wish to allow that.
And I've got no problems with Mr. Pressman. We sometimes work together on applications in other jurisdictions, but I thought I heard him say tonight on the record that he never represented or is not representing that there are any density limitations or height limitations in the application. And I want to ask him a question that on that handout that I gave you, highlighted in yellow, you have a copy of it. What does the statement say that's highlighted in yellow? First page on your letter.
Notes there are no variations or bonuses sought for the site development, which refers to this application this evening.
Second question for you, Todd, on your statement of support, after Mr. Healy asked you some questions, the second page of my handout highlighted in yellow, what does it say?
There are no bonuses for additional density requested or any variances to any development criteria, including setbacks. That, of course, again, has been clarified many times to mean this application, only for this application. We're not precluding, or excuse me, we're not restricting any kind of activity in the future.
Okay, you can sit down, please. Mr. Lackey, your architect. The Anglers Cove property is 202 feet wide. The Siotes property is 202 feet wide. Anglers Cove is 6 stories over parking. Siotes is 5 stories over parking. We don't have an issue with them being 4 stories over parking, but I want to ask his architect a question.
Well, his
Yeah.
architect didn't testify, so you
Okay,
can't,
so we
you can't give any,
Okay,
you
then I'll-
can't cross-examine or rebut anything because there wasn't any testimony.
Okay,
by the
that's fine,
architect.
that's fine. Then I'll ask Mr. Healy a question about in planning, planning and zoning and looking at building massing. Does the building height relative to the width or size of the property have any effect on how large that building appears?
Sure it does. It's the bulk of the building, its dimensions, its height, have a lot to do with the proportionate size of the site. And that's why density and other limits are usually calculated based on the number of units per acre. This is about half the width of those adjoining properties, neighboring properties. Thank you.
Yeah. And with that, to the record, we happy to answer any questions. We would hope you would consider these conditions of approval because we think a 6-story, 65-foot tall building is too tall.
It's not just further argument.
Oh, I get a rebuttal, right?
And you don't have a site plan, right? So
Thank you.
This is all.
Right. Thanks.
Madam Chair, I believe I have the ability to rebut testimony or have another say in regard to rebuttal. I'm sorry, ma'am. Thank you. Because you indicated you closed public comment, so I want to be sure. Thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt. Mr. Chairman, board members, this has been very well discussed. I'm not going to beat on anything else. The only thing I wanted to respond to, Mr. Pergolesi has listed a number of conditions, and we've discussed these, he and I, and with Mr. Lackey. And these conditions, as Mr. Lackey has reviewed them, are all, as we understand them, the maximum parameters of the zoning district. The setbacks are required 20 feet. That you've heard over and over again, the number of units is restricted. and refers to the pier rather than putting us on the property. So there's no need for the conditions because these conditions are exactly the parameters and restrictions under the zoning categories. And that's presented before you. Thank you.
Okay, so any final questions from anybody here, from any of us?
Yeah, I have one final question for you, Bob, probably to answer it. I was trying to think of benefits and of this project, and I was wondering if there's a 70% impervious property, you know. And would that now would be taking up essentially a parking lot, I assume. So it's only at least 30% of it would not go back as impervious. So I mean, would that be a benefit of for
Well, the whole thing's a
FEMA and the
parking lot.
flooding and
The
all
whole
that?
thing's a parking lot now, right?
Right, so I'm saying, would it be a benefit to not having, if they couldn't put it back at any more than 70%?
No matter how you redevelop it, it's going to have an impervious surface ratio. Normally, open space would have a lower amount of impervious surface, and a high density would have a higher amount of impervious surface. Generally speaking, I don't know, I would have to look at the town's codes to know exactly what that ratio is, but any redevelopment will be to current codes.
And Madam Chair, let me suggest that if any of you have any questions to anybody that has testified so
Right.
far,
Okay,
now would be the time, and then the public hearing should be closed, and then you all can have any questions among yourselves or discussions from the board. Just so that everybody's not trying to respond to your question. So,
So
but if any of you have any additional questions during the public hearing, now would be the time.
okay, thank you. No further questions.
No further questions?
No.
So let's close the public hearing. And then we'll. I'm sorry?
Do we get rebuttal of something he said?
I think we have
No,
enough.
they just
I think we're good.
Public
We're,
hearing's
we're
closed.
fine.
So we're gonna discuss this. This is our time to discuss, and then,
So I think we keep talking about this as open space, and we have to be realistic about what this open space is right now. It's a parking lot, and it's not a park, like, you know,
Well,
we are discussing it as, right? I mean, just when we were referring to it just there. So,
any of the recreational uses listed, if you have an accessory structure, I mean, there's several things you can do with the property.
well, and will it be, I guess, is the real question,
You know, like
right?
pickleball?
What's that on?
Does it play pickleball?
It says tennis courts. I think. Sure, pickleball.
So I guess, has the town considered buying this so we can have, so we can have a say in this? Because I mean, for us to expect a private resident to put a park on their property.
Golf course, or, I mean, there are a lot of recreational privately owned things that contribute to.
Their Oceanside worth $6 million.
It's part of the, it's part of.
And that's really an issue is the value of the property makes it so that that's very untangible to fight for a business that, when you talk about someone being an economist, then any business person that owns a business can tell you can make money on that small of an area, and it's pretty tough.
So I think it's pretty irresponsible to add people to the coastal high hazard area. I also don't see the benefit to the town to the condos there. I really don't see the benefit. I think that, you know, and this is just my opinion, I just think that the current land use and zoning, there's plenty of ample opportunity to do something with property, with current zoning and land use.
But we have to be realistic. If the current property owner or a future property owner, if they would be able to even sell it, would do that. You know, right now that we have the situation that we have with what the pier is. I mean, we have, or the property that we're discussing that used to be the pier property. And, you know, what's reasonable? What's realistic that's going to happen here? And that's why I was curious if we've looked at evaluating it to purchase it for the town, because yeah, because that's that, you know, that would be an option. But
Well, it's been open space recreation, it's been zoned like this for the long term. the person that purchased it, the owner of the property, knew what he was purchasing. I don't see a hardship here. I don't see, I mean, I think there's opportunity for it to be successful as a recreational use.
And I don't know if that's been evaluated or, again, I mean, I think we asked that and that wasn't necessarily specified in either report.
But is that our job to say whether what businesses are viable there? I mean, our job is to decide whether or not we think they should be able to build a condo.
Okay, so let's go back to the comp plan. The comp plan wants to maintain the character of the town. It wants to protect people and property. It clearly states that we should not be increasing density in the coastal high hazard area. It speaks about maintaining all of the recreational space we have to ensure that we have a balance of different.
Only
land
that's
uses.
the only recreational space that you're discussing, though, that's privately owned, correct?
I don't know what's privately owned, publicly
It's the only one that's privately owned.
Yeah, there was something in the
There-
documentation
It says in
that
here
said
that
this
there
is
are
the only
4 of them.
one.
That's the only one
Right.
that's
Let me-
privately
let me-
owned.
Hold on just a minute. You do have a court reporter here, so only one of you at a time because she can't get 3 people at once. Sorry.
Yeah, I can't see that we as a township would expect a private owner to do that. You know, I could see if it was back in the 50s when they had a fishing pier there. There's no longer a fishing pier there. And is it our place to tell them what the viable business for them to put in place is, or to even choose what their business can be on their privately owned property? And what they're asking us is, can we take that privately owned property and change the zoning on it so we can put a condo? That's what we're discussing. We're not discussing what businesses he can put on there that are viable.
We're
It's
not
our-
discussing what businesses are viable now, but we're discussing what businesses would be viable underneath the current land use that it has and how that current land use is consistent with the comprehensive plan. And it does meet the objectives and goals of the comprehensive plan, which is the vision of the town. If you start changing land use left and right, then there's
Well, right now, it
altering
just,
the character of the town. That would be like somebody purchasing a residential house at the end of the street and somebody saying, well, this one's kind of close to Gulf Boulevard, so I think I'd like to put a big restaurant or a condo there.
I think that's a little different than you got 2 condos that are right beside both of them. I mean,
But I mean, land use
that's
is
not a
big
tit for tat
deal,
argument.
and we need to look at the overall vision of the town.
Well, but
So
Terry
right
had-
now, the overall vision is the town is sitting with a vacant property that looks dilapidated and run down. So what is better for the township? Is it better for the township to have a condo that pays taxes and looks good? Or is it better to have an empty, dilapidated property that's not being taken care of?
No, that's.
And I don't know if that's that was the goal of letting the property diminish. And that's not what I'm saying at all, but it seems that way.
And that's what code enforcement will come in to make sure that any of the property.
But the reality is when the pier was removed, that changed that property. So, I mean, to your point exactly, that has changed the whole structure of the town because the Redington Long Pier was what it was, and that's why the property that it's on,
Mr. Haley clarified that it could go back then. I mean, you could put it back.
well, and we tried that with the last time this came to the board. There was an opportunity to save the pier. And I know there's a lot of people who are not happy about how that went down, unfortunately, and here we are now, so. I mean, Mr. Healy is recommending this, and he's the consultant that the town has hired to help us evaluate this. So I guess the question is, why would we not accept his recommendation?
Well, his recommendation is
We really have to balance the property owner's rights and all of the land use requirements, and not look at one here and look at one here. I'm not an economist, but I know for a fact that a miniature golf course there would not be economically feasible. It just wouldn't. There's not enough room and there's no parking, as an example. The best use for that property, while it may not be perfect, is, a commercial enterprise like a condo built at this point, in my opinion. The value of the property is not being fully utilized. The benefit to Redington Shores will be the tax base that it creates. Sure, there's going to be a slight or minimal impact on density and intensity. There will be, but 10 dwelling units is not the end of the world. we're gonna lose it forever. I understand that. But we've got an individual owner that may not be the most upstanding citizen in the world. He hasn't paid his taxes in 2 years. And he's let the pier deteriorate to the point where they had to tear it down. As far as putting a new pier there, to go through the process of getting a new land lease from the state of Florida under current environmental conditions, I don't think that'll ever happen. And if it would happen, it would be not in my lifetime. I think we have to, again, balance the personal property owner's rights to that property and what he can do with it. And in the long run, it's going to benefit him. That property will be maintained. The town will create some, or get some tax revenue out of it. And, you know, I think it makes sense. Now, my question to all of you is, can we recommend to the commission to approve the land use change, but not the zoning until we get a site plan, until we get an actual.
Mr. Dunhart? Yeah.
You have two proposed ordinances before you, one to change the land use, and one to change the zoning. You need to recommend one way or the other on each of the two ordinances, as Mr. Healy suggested to you. You should probably consider the land use plan map amendment first. And because if that doesn't go through, then it can't be rezoned to something that's not in the
Correct.
category of 10. And you can recommend to the commission whatever conditions on either you wish at this point, because that's one of your functions as a local planning agency. So you can vote yes on both ordinances or to recommend both ordinances. You can vote to recommend denial of both ordinances, or you could recommend approval of one and denial of one. But of course, this is a recommendation to the commission on both of them, but you should go ahead and consider both of the ordinances tonight.
Well,
That
that
answer
is
the question?
Yeah, that's my question. Yeah, that we can do.
We have no development agreement, and Mr. President clearly stated that he's not capping it at the max potential, and.
So we want to make a motion then?
For variance requests.
I make a motion that we move to recommend the change for the future land use category to RH.
Seconded.
Jerry Falwell,
Or in the board discussion, or your own head.
I'm sorry.
I'm not going to look at the discussion.
Any discussion on that?
Motion.
No, this is the first ordinance, correct?
But
This is
the land
land
use,
use.
Member Bourgeois, member Kaby,
Yes.
member Hoyt,
Yes.
member Laird,
no,
and Chair Foster.
No. Okay, so we take a motion on the second one, please, somebody?
Make a motion to turn down the zoning to RM15 until the outside plan.
and when you say turn down, to recommend denial to the town commission.
And then second.
So the motion is to deny it until we have the site plan,
My recommendation. Yeah.
but until we have the site plan.
Well, we can't say that.
You can't?
Deny what's in front of us.
Okay,
and then we
right.
can say, "No, we consider it."
But you said we could put stipulations.
You can recommend whatever you
Right,
wish.
that's what I'm saying. So I think we should say that.
Yeah,
Right,
I want to.
okay.
So what is the motion?
Motion is to deny recommendation of rezoning to RM15.
Until we have the site.
Until we have a site plan.
I'll call it a development agreement. Do we have a second?
Second.
Sherry, please call roll.
Member Bourgeois,
Yes.
Member Katie,
Yes.
Member White,
Yes.
Member Laird,
Yes.
Chair Foster,
Yes.
Madam Chair, just a point of clarification. What was the motion on the
The
second?
motion is to deny to recommend denial of the zoning change
Mhm.
with recommendation that be reconsidered with a development agreement.
I thought I heard site plan.
She
And
said-
development
I
agreement.
said site plan originally, and she said change it to development.
So for clarification, do you see a development agreement that includes a site plan or just a development agreement?
With the site plan, yes.
So site plan as a part of the development agreement, with all due respect, and maybe our order, is that how the other members understood the motion? Because I did not hear that. I'm not pushing one or the other. I just want clarity.
Ask the clerk to read back the motion.
Okay.
That's
I just want clarity for everyone for what we're
the
going to do.
motion that was made, seconded and passed, so if there's a question what the motion was, the best way is to have the clerk read it back.
motion I have is denial of recommendation to rezone to R15 until the site plan with developers agreement is provided.
Thank you. Thank you for the